A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Sacrifice. The scent of death clung to the small cottage like morning mist, refusing to lift despite Evelyn's desperate prayers. She knelt beside her little brother's bed, pressing a damp cloth to his burning forehead, as another violent shiver racked his small frame. Timothy's breathing came in shallow gasps, his 8-year-old body far too still beneath the threadbare blankets. "The fever's getting worse," she whispered to their mother, Lady Catherine Wrenworth, who stood in the doorway wringing her hands. At 49, Catherine still possessed traces of the beauty that had once caught their father's eye, but grief and worry had carved deep lines around her brown eyes, the same warm shade that Evelyn had inherited. "How long has it been since he last opened his eyes?" Catherine's voice trembled as she approached the bed, her graying hair escaping its usually perfect bun. 3 days. Evelyn's throat constricted around the words. 3 days since Timothy had last smiled at her, since he'd asked for one of her silly stories about brave knights and magical kingdoms. 3 days of watching the mysterious fever consume him piece by piece. The healer from their village had declared it hopeless 2 nights ago. "Moon fever," old Henrik had pronounced with grim certainty. "Strikes the young ones sometimes. Those with wolf blood who haven't come into their gifts yet. Nothing earthly can cure it once it takes hold." Evelyn smoothed Timothy's damp brown curls away from his pale face. He looked so much like their father, would have grown to be just as handsome and strong if the fever didn't claim him first. The thought sent fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "There might be another way," Catherine said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Her mother sank into the chair beside the bed, aging 10 years in that single moment. "The royal antidote. They say the Alpha King's treasury holds remedies for ailments that normal healers cannot touch. Magical cures collected from across the realm." "The Alpha King?" Evelyn's blood chilled. Everyone in the kingdom knew of Magnus Valdrek, the blind ruler who had united the fractured territories through sheer force of will despite his affliction. Stories spoke of his ruthless efficiency, his cold demeanor, the way grown warriors trembled in his presence. "Mother, what are you suggesting?" Catherine reached across the bed to grasp Evelyn's hand, her fingers ice-cold despite the warmth of the room. "He has no queen, no heir. The nobles have been pressuring him to take a wife for years." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Evelyn felt the floor tilt beneath her knees as understanding crashed over her. "No, absolutely not. The marriage would secure Timothy's cure," her mother pressed on, desperation making her voice stronger. "A political alliance with a minor noble house in exchange for the antidote. It's the only way. I won't be sold like cattle to save," Evelyn began. But Timothy's weak cough cut her off. She looked down at his waxen face, watched his chest struggle to rise and fall, and felt her resolve crumble. He was innocent in all this. 8 years old and fighting for every breath because some cruel twist of fate had cursed him with moon fever. "The king is blind, not cruel," Catherine said softly, reading the conflict in her daughter's expression. "Perhaps he would be kind to you. Kind. As if kindness could make up for sacrificing her entire future to a man she'd never met. A man whose very presence was said to make hardened soldiers weep with terror. But what choice did she have? Watch Timothy die, or condemn herself to a loveless marriage? "How would we even approach him?" Evelyn asked, hating herself for considering it. "Lord Grayson owes our family a debt. He could arrange an audience, present you as a suitable bride. The king's advisors have been searching for potential queens among the noble houses." Timothy stirred slightly, his cracked lips parting as if trying to speak. Evelyn leaned closer, catching the faint whisper of her name. Her heart shattered completely. "I'll do it," she said, the words tearing from her throat like pieces of her soul. "If it will save him, I'll marry the Alpha King." The journey to the royal castle took 2 days through autumn forests, ablaze with gold and crimson. Evelyn sat rigidly in the carriage, her best dress, a simple blue gown that had belonged to her grandmother, carefully arranged around her. She'd pinned her long chestnut hair into an elaborate style that Catherine had fussed over for an hour that morning, declaring it fit for a queen. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to become a queen, and all she felt was emptiness. Lord Grayson, a portly man with kind eyes and a nervous disposition, had been apologetically efficient in arranging the meeting. His Majesty was intrigued by the proposal. He'd explained during their brief stop at his manor. A marriage of mutual benefit. Your bloodline is respectable, and you're certainly comely enough. Comely enough. As if her appearance were the most important qualification for becoming queen of the realm. The castle rose before them like a great stone beast, its towers reaching toward storm-darkened clouds. Guards in black and silver livery flanked the massive gates, their eyes tracking the carriage with professional wariness. Everything about the place spoke of power and controlled violence. "Remember," Catherine murmured as they passed through the courtyard, "be respectful. Keep your eyes down. And whatever happens, think of Timothy." The throne room was a study in intimidation. Massive stone columns supported a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows, while banners bearing the royal coat of arms, a silver wolf rampant on a black field, hung like silent sentinels along the walls. Courtiers in expensive clothing clustered in small groups, their conversations dying as Evelyn entered. And there, on the throne carved from black stone, sat the Alpha King. Magnus Valdrek was nothing like she'd expected. The story spoke of his blindness as if it were a weakness, but the man before her radiated power like heat from a forge. He was tall, even seated, with broad shoulders filling out his dark velvet doublet. His hair was black as midnight, falling in waves to his collar, and his face was all sharp angles and aristocratic lines, but it was his eyes that held her transfixed. A pale blue-gray that seemed to look right through her, despite their sightless state. "Approach," he commanded, his voice a rich baritone that resonated through the vast chamber. Evelyn's legs felt like water as she walked toward the throne, acutely aware of every whisper, every stare from the assembled nobles. She stopped at what seemed like a respectful distance and dropped into the deepest curtsy she could manage. "Your Majesty, Lady Evelyn Renworth." Her name rolled off his tongue with careful precision, as if he were tasting each syllable. "I'm told you come seeking an alliance." "I do, Your Majesty." She kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. "My family offers our loyalty and service in exchange for your consideration." A murmur rippled through the watching courtiers. Somewhere to her left, she caught sight of a fair-haired man in rich robes watching the proceedings with obvious interest. Something about his calculating expression made her skin crawl. "And what form would this service take?" Magnus asked, though they both knew the answer. "Marriage, Your Majesty. If you would have me." The silence stretched until Evelyn wondered if she'd made some terrible mistake. Then Magnus leaned forward slightly, his unseeing gaze somehow finding her face with unnerving accuracy. "The ceremony will take place at sunset," he said simply. "Lord Corwin will see to the arrangements." The fair-haired man stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his green eyes. "Of course, Your Majesty. I'll ensure everything is prepared." And just like that, Evelyn's fate was sealed. No courtship, no time to reconsider. In a matter of hours, she would become queen to a man she'd spoken perhaps 20 words to. The wedding ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and binding vows. The castle's chapel was filled with nobles she didn't recognize, their faces ranging from curious to openly speculative. Magnus stood beside her like a statue carved from marble, his expression unreadable as the priest droned through the traditional liturgy. When the time came to exchange rings, his fingers were surprisingly gentle as they slipped the heavy gold band onto her trembling hand. For just a moment, she thought she felt him squeeze her fingers, a gesture of reassurance, perhaps, or acknowledgement of the sacrifice they were both making. "You may kiss your bride," the priest announced. Magnus turned toward her, his hands rising to cup her face with unexpected tenderness. His touch was warm, calloused from sword work, despite his blindness. When his lips met hers, the kiss was chaste, but not unkind. A promise, perhaps, that he would not be the monster she'd feared. The great hall erupted in celebration as they entered for the wedding feast, but Evelyn felt detached from it all, as if watching someone else's life unfold. She sat beside her new husband at the high table, picking at the elaborate dishes while nobles approached to offer congratulations that felt more like condolences. "Are you well?" Magnus asked quietly during a lull in the endless parade of well-wishers. "I'm fine, Your Majesty." The formal address felt strange now that they were wed. "Magnus," he corrected. We are married now. There's no need for such formality in private. Private? Would they ever truly be alone together? The thought terrified and intrigued her in equal measure. As the evening wore on, servants began clearing away the feast. Several guests had already departed, and those who remained were deep in their cups. Lord Corwin appeared at Magnus's elbow, leaning close to murmur something in the king's ear. "The queen is tired," Magnus announced, rising from his chair. "We will retire." Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks as she realized what that meant. The wedding night. Her mother had given her the briefest of explanations about what to expect. But theory and practice were vastly different things. Magnus offered her his arm as they left the hall, and she was surprised by how naturally he navigated the castle corridors despite his blindness. He must have memorized every stone, every turn. The realization made her wonder what other assumptions about his limitations might be wrong. "You needn't fear me," he said, as they climbed the stairs toward what she assumed were the royal chambers. "I know this marriage is not of your choosing. It was my choice," she replied, then immediately wondered why she'd felt compelled to correct him. He paused on the landing, turning slightly toward her. Was it? Or was it necessity disguised as choice? The question hung between them, too close to the truth for comfort. Before she could formulate an answer, a servant appeared with news that made her heart leap. "Your Majesty, a messenger has arrived from Millbrook. The young Lord Timothy's fever has broken. The royal antidote arrived just in time." Relief flooded through Evelyn so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. Timothy was safe. Whatever else happened, her sacrifice had served its purpose. But as they continued toward the royal chambers, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The servants' whispered conversations echoed in her mind. Fragments about the king's condition. Hushed speculation about how much longer he might live. One phrase in particular stuck with her as Magnus led her into their new shared world. "The king's shadow deepens with every full moon." She didn't know exactly what it meant, but the weight in the servants' whispers was unmistakable. Whatever curse or illness plagued her new husband, it was growing stronger each month beneath the moonlight. And as queen, she would be there to witness whatever darkness was yet to come. Chapter 2. Shadows and Secrets. Marriage to the Alpha King was nothing like the fairy tales Evelyn had grown up hearing. There were no romantic morning walks through gardens, no intimate dinners by candlelight, no gentle words of affection whispered in the darkness. Instead, there was a careful distance that Magnus maintained between them, as if he were afraid of contaminating her with whatever darkness plagued him. 3 weeks had passed since their wedding, and Evelyn had settled into the peculiar rhythm of castle life. She breakfasted alone while Magnus attended council meetings. She spent her afternoons in the solar with the other noble ladies, learning the intricate politics of court, while embroidering cushions she would never use. Evenings found her dining at the high table beside her silent husband, making polite conversation with visiting dignitaries who seemed more interested in studying Magnus for signs of weakness than in actually governing the realm. It was during these evening meals that she first began to notice the episodes. Magnus would be perfectly composed one moment, discussing trade agreements or military matters with his usual sharp intelligence. And then something would shift. His hands would begin to tremble almost imperceptibly. A thin sheen of sweat would break across his forehead despite the cool autumn air. His breathing would become shallow, careful, as if each breath cost him tremendous effort. The first time she witnessed it, Evelyn had leaned closer, concern overriding her usual hesitation. "Are you well?" His jaw had tightened, and for a moment she'd seen something vulnerable flicker across his features before the mask of royal composure slammed back into place. "I'm fine." But he clearly wasn't fine. The episodes were becoming more frequent, more severe. Sometimes they lasted mere minutes. Other times they stretched on for what felt like hours. And through it all, Lord Corwin Darkwater, Magnus's beta and closest advisor, hovered nearby like a devoted shadow. "His Majesty requires his medicine," Corwin would announce during the worst attacks, producing a small vial of dark liquid that Magnus would drink without question. The potion seemed to help. The trembling would subside, his breathing would steady, but it also left him strangely lethargic, as if the cure were sapping his strength along with alleviating his symptoms. What illness does the king suffer from? Evelyn had asked the castle's head healer, Master Aldrich, during one of her visits to the infirmary, where she'd taken to helping tend minor injuries among the servants. The elderly man had glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "The curse, Your Majesty. The same dark magic that stole his sight continues to plague him. Lord Corwin has been most dedicated in managing His Majesty's treatment. Curse." The word sent ice through Evelyn's veins. Everyone knew the story. How Magnus had lost his sight 3 years ago when a witch's curse had struck him down during a diplomatic mission gone wrong. But she'd assumed that was the extent of it. A cruel twist of fate that had robbed him of his vision, but left him otherwise whole. Apparently, she'd been mistaken. "Is there no cure?" she'd pressed. But Master Aldrich had already begun backing away, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. "Lord Corwin knows best, Your Majesty. Best to leave such matters to him. Lord Corwin." Everything seemed to circle back to the fair-haired Beta, who had inserted himself so thoroughly into Magnus's care. Evelyn had initially been grateful for his attention to her husband's needs, but lately, something about his constant presence had begun to unsettle her. It was the way he watched Magnus during the episodes, she realized. Not with concern or sympathy, but with a calculating interest that made her skin crawl, as if he were studying the effects of the illness, rather than genuinely caring about alleviating them. "You're troubled," Magnus observed one evening, as they walked slowly through the castle's upper corridors. It had become their routine, a brief constitutional before retiring to their separate chambers. Magnus claimed the walking helped clear his head after long days of governance, and Evelyn had taken to guiding him past tapestries and suits of armor, describing the artwork he could no longer see. "The autumn light is beautiful this time of day," she said instead of answering his observation. "Golden and warm, turning everything it touches to amber. There's a portrait of your grandfather just ahead. He has your eyes, though his are blue where yours are gray." Magnus's steps slowed. "My eyes were blue once. Before. The admission hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. The curse changed them? Among other things. His voice carried a weight of loss that made her chest tighten. "Tell me, what color are yours?" I never thought to ask. "Brown." "Nothing special." His free hand rose suddenly, fingers brushing against her cheek with startling gentleness. "May I?" Evelyn's breath caught as she nodded, then remembered he couldn't see the gesture. "Yes." His touch was feather light as he traced the contours of her face. The sweep of her cheekbones, the line of her jaw, the curve of her lips. His fingertips were warm and slightly calloused, and she found herself leaning into the contact despite herself. "Beautiful," he murmured, so quietly she almost missed the word. "I can feel your warmth. Smell the jasmine oil you wear in your hair. But I'll never see the color of your eyes or the way sunlight turns your hair to copper." The raw pain in his voice made tears prick behind her eyes. Without thinking, she covered his hand with hers, pressing his palm fully against her cheek. "I'm sorry for what was taken from you." For a moment, they stood frozen in that intimate tableau, her hand over his fingers mapping the geography of her face. She could feel his pulse thrumming beneath her touch, steady and strong despite the weakness that periodically claimed him. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor behind them, and Magnus jerked his hand away as if burned. "Your Majesty," Corwin's smooth voice cut through the moment like a blade. "I've been looking for you. It's time for your evening medication." Magnus straightened, the vulnerable man disappearing behind his royal facade. Of course. But as Corwin approached with his ever-present vial of dark liquid, Evelyn caught something in the Beta's expression that made her stomach clench. Satisfaction. As if he'd planned the interruption, orchestrated it to remind them both of Magnus's dependence on his treatments. "Perhaps we should continue this tomorrow," Magnus said, accepting the vial from Corwin's hands. "The medicine makes me drowsy." Evelyn nodded, but her mind was racing as she made her way back to her chambers. The timing of Corwin's arrival, the knowing look in his green eyes, the way Magnus's episode seemed to worsen whenever the Beta wasn't immediately available with his treatments. It all felt wrong somehow. That night, sleep eluded her completely. She paced her chambers until the fire burned low, replaying every interaction she'd witnessed between Magnus and his supposedly devoted Beta. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that something was terribly amiss. Near midnight, she heard it. Magnus's voice from the adjoining royal chamber, rough with pain and barely controlled panic. "Corwin, please. I need..." Evelyn pressed her ear to the connecting door, her heart hammering as she listened to her husband's distress. Heavy footsteps crossed the room. Corwin, responding to the king's call. "Of course, Your Majesty, but the dose will need to be stronger this time. The curse is progressing. Whatever it takes," Magnus gasped. "Just make it stop." There was a long moment of silence. Then Magnus's breathing gradually steadied. But instead of leaving, Corwin lingered, and Evelyn had to strain to catch his words. "Sleep well, Your Majesty. Tomorrow we'll discuss increasing the frequency of treatments. We can't have these episodes interfering with your duties." "No," Magnus agreed weakly. "The kingdom needs me strong." "Indeed it does." Something in Corwin's tone made Evelyn's blood freeze. "Sleep now. I'll be here to ensure you're not disturbed." As Corwin's footsteps retreated, Evelyn sank to the floor beside the door, her mind reeling. The casual way he'd mentioned increasing the treatments, the almost proprietary note in his voice when he'd spoken of Magnus's needs, it all pointed to a level of control that went far beyond normal medical care. And then there were his final words, heavy with implication. "I'll be here to ensure you're not disturbed. Not protected. Not cared for. Disturbed." As if Magnus were some kind of experiment that required careful monitoring, rather than a king deserving of genuine healing. Dawn was breaking over the castle walls when understanding finally crystallized in Evelyn's mind. She didn't know how yet, and she couldn't prove it, but every instinct she possessed was screaming the same terrible truth. Corwin wasn't trying to cure Magnus. He was slowly, methodically, killing him. Chapter 3. The Investigation. The castle's ancient library had become Evelyn's sanctuary in the weeks following her wedding. Hidden away in the highest tower, surrounded by dusty tomes and forgotten histories, she could think clearly without Corwin's calculating green eyes tracking her every movement. Today, however, her purpose was far from leisurely reading. "Curses of the Northern Kingdoms," she murmured, tracing her finger down the spine of a leather-bound volume. Magical afflictions and their remedies. The books were old, some of their pages crumbling at the edges, but they contained knowledge that might save her husband's life, if she was right about Corwin's treachery. The morning sun streamed through the library's tall windows, casting dancing patterns across the wooden tables where Evelyn had spread her research. She'd been here since dawn, poring over every reference to blindness-inducing curses she could find, and the picture emerging was troubling. According to the texts, true magical curses were remarkably consistent in their effects. They struck swiftly and completely, leaving their victims with permanent but stable disabilities. A curse that caused blindness wouldn't continue to worsen over time. It would simply render the victim sightless and then remain dormant. But Magnus's condition was anything but stable. The episodes were becoming more frequent, more severe. His hands shook with increasing regularity, and she'd noticed him struggling to maintain his balance during their evening walks. Whatever was affecting him was progressive, not static, which meant it might not be a curse at all. Researching your husband's affliction? Evelyn spun around to find Master Aldrich standing in the doorway, his weathered face creased with what might have been sympathy. The old healer moved slowly into the library, his gnarled hands clasped behind his back. "I'm trying to understand what happened to him," she admitted. "The histories don't seem to match what I'm observing." Aldrich nodded slowly, glancing around to ensure they were alone before approaching her table. "You're an intelligent woman, Your Majesty. More intelligent than many give you credit for." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "I've served this castle for 40 years, he said quietly. "I've seen many ailments, many treatments, and I've learned to recognize when something doesn't quite fit the pattern." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "Are you saying you don't believe the king suffers from a curse?" Aldrich was quiet for a long moment, studying the books scattered across her table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, His Majesty was the picture of health. Strong as an ox, eyes like a hawk, reflexes that could put men half his age to shame. Then he returned from that diplomatic mission changed. The curse? So we were told. Aldrich's fingers drummed nervously against the table's edge. But curses don't typically require daily treatment, Your Majesty. They're fixed magical states, not progressive illnesses. The confirmation of her own suspicions sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. Then what do you think is wrong with him? I think, Aldrich said carefully, that you should be very cautious about who you trust with your questions. Before she could press him further, footsteps echoed in the stairwell leading to the library. Aldrich straightened immediately, his expression shifting to neutral professionalism as Corwin appeared in the doorway. "Your Majesty," the beta said with his usual practiced smile. "I've been looking for you. His Majesty was asking after your whereabouts." "I was just doing some reading," Evelyn replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Master Aldrich was helping me locate some texts on the kingdom's history." Corwin's gaze swept over the books on her table, lingering for just a moment too long on the titles about magical afflictions. "How thoughtful of you to take such interest in your new home's heritage. I'm sure His Majesty will be pleased by your dedication." There was something in the way he said it. Pleasant on the surface, but with an undercurrent that made her skin crawl, as if he knew exactly what she'd been researching, and found it amusing rather than concerning. "I should return to him," Evelyn said, beginning to gather the books. "He shouldn't be kept waiting. Allow me to escort you," Corwin offered, stepping aside to let her pass. "The castle can be confusing for newcomers." Evelyn had no choice but to accept, though every instinct screamed at her to refuse. As they descended the winding stairs, she was acutely aware of Corwin's presence behind her. Too close, too attentive, like a predator herding its prey. "You know," he said conversationally, "His Majesty is fortunate to have found such a caring wife. Your concern for his well-being is truly touching. Any wife would be concerned about her husband's health. Indeed. Though I hope you understand that his condition requires very specific care. The treatments I've developed over the years are quite delicate. Any interference could prove dangerous." The warning was clear despite its polite delivery. Evelyn kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. Corwin wasn't just suspicious of her questions, he was actively warning her away from investigating further, which only convinced her more thoroughly that she was on the right track. They found Magnus in his study, seated behind the massive oak desk that had belonged to his father and grandfather before him. Stacks of documents covered its surface, and he was running his fingers over the pages with practiced efficiency, reading the raised seal impressions and dictating responses to a scribe. "Evelyn," he said, his face brightening as she entered. The transformation was remarkable, the careful mask of royal composure melting away to reveal something warmer, more genuine. "I was hoping you might join me for lunch." "I'd be honored," she replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Somewhere in the weeks since their marriage, she'd begun to genuinely care for this complex man who bore such heavy burdens with quiet dignity. "Excellent. Corwin, that will be all for now." The dismissal was polite but firm, and Evelyn caught a flicker of something, annoyance, frustration, crossed the beta's features before he bowed and withdrew. "You've been avoiding me," Magnus observed once they were alone. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't want to intrude on your duties." "My duties don't extend to meals." He rose from behind the desk, moving with that careful precision she'd come to recognize. "Besides, I find myself curious about you. We've been married nearly a month, and I know almost nothing about the woman who agreed to bind her life to mine." He approached slowly, and Evelyn found herself holding her breath as he drew near. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his temples. Despite everything, the political marriage, his illness, the mystery surrounding his condition, he was undeniably handsome. "What would you like to know?" she asked. "Everything." His hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with heartbreaking gentleness. "Your favorite flowers, the sound of your laugh, what makes you happy, what makes you sad." The intimacy of the touch, the raw honesty in his voice, made her chest tight with emotion. "Magnus, I know this isn't the marriage you dreamed of," he continued. "A blind king, more burden than blessing, but I find myself hoping that perhaps, in time, we might find some measure of happiness together." "You're not a burden," she whispered, covering his hand with hers. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. His thumb traced the line of her lower lip, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. The air between them crackled with possibility, with the potential for something real to grow from their arranged beginning. Then his hand stiffened, and a now familiar tremor ran through his fingers. His face went pale, and she could see the struggle as he fought against whatever was attacking his system. "Magnus, what can I do?" "Corwin," he gasped. "I need my medicine." But Corwin was nowhere to be found, and Magnus was growing worse by the second. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing became labored. In desperation, Evelyn guided him to a chair and knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. "Look at me," she said, though she immediately felt foolish for the instruction. "Listen to my voice. You're safe. I'm here with you." To her surprise, his grip on her hands tightened, and his breathing began to slow. The tremors subsided gradually, and some color returned to his face. When the episode finally passed, he stared in her direction with something approaching wonder. "How did you do that?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I just wanted to help." The episodes usually last much longer without the medicine. His voice carried a note of confusion, as if her presence had somehow altered the very nature of his affliction. "You have a remarkable effect on me, my queen." The endearment, spoken so softly and with such genuine warmth, made her heart skip. But even as she savored the moment, her mind was cataloging what had just occurred. Magnus's condition had improved with her touch, her presence, which meant either her proximity had some kind of healing effect, or his illness wasn't as uncontrollable as Corwin claimed. "Your Majesty!" Corwin's voice rang out as he burst into the study, a familiar vial in his hand. "I came as soon as I heard—" "Oh," he stopped short, taking in Magnus's relatively composed state. "You seem to have recovered." "Yes," Magnus said slowly. The episode passed more quickly than usual. Corwin's gaze shifted to Evelyn, still kneeling beside the king's chair, and she saw calculation flicker in his green eyes. "How fortunate. Though you should still take your medication, just to be safe." "That won't be necessary," Magnus replied, and Evelyn caught the slight tightening around Corwin's mouth. "I feel much better." "As you wish, Your Majesty." But as Corwin turned to leave, Evelyn heard him mutter under his breath, "Interesting." The single word sent ice through her veins. She was becoming a variable in whatever game Corwin was playing, and that made her dangerous to his plans, which meant she was running out of time to uncover the truth. That evening, she found herself back in the library. But this time her research took a different direction. Instead of magical curses, she searched for information about poisons, specifically, substances that could cause progressive neurological damage while maintaining the appearance of mystical affliction. What she found made her blood run cold. Tears of the Banshee. She read aloud from a tome on exotic toxins. A rare poison extracted from the nightshade family causes progressive blindness, tremors, and eventual paralysis. Effects can be mistaken for curse work due to the gradual onset and mysterious nature of symptoms, particularly effective when administered in small, regular doses over extended periods. Her hands shook as she turned the page, reading about antidotes and treatments. The poison was virtually undetectable once it had bonded with the victim's system, and reversal required immediate cessation of exposure combined with specific herbal remedies. But first, she would need proof of what Corwin was doing to her husband. And she would need to find it before the next full moon, when the servants whispered that Magnus's episodes always reached their worst. She had less than a week to save the man she was beginning to love. Chapter 4. The Truth and the Threat. The Opportunity. Evelyn had been waiting for came 3 days before the full moon, when Corwin departed the castle on what he claimed was urgent business in the eastern provinces. She waited until well past midnight before slipping from her chambers, her heart hammering as she made her way through the darkened corridors toward the Beta's private apartments. The castle felt different at night. Ancient stones seemed to whisper secrets, and shadows danced with menacing life in the flickering torchlight. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her bare feet sounded thunderous in the oppressive silence. But she pressed on, driven by desperate determination. Corwin's chambers were located in the tower adjacent to the royal wing, a position that spoke of his elevated status within the court hierarchy. The heavy oak door was locked, but Evelyn had come prepared. During her weeks in the castle, she'd befriended several of the kitchen maids, and one had taught her the art of picking simple locks with hairpins. Her hands trembled as she worked the mechanism, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool night air. After what felt like an eternity, she heard the satisfying click of the lock disengaging. Corwin's sitting room was spartanly furnished but undeniably rich. Tapestries from the southern kingdoms adorned the walls, and a collection of expensive books lined mahogany shelves. Everything was meticulously organized, from the perfectly aligned writing instruments on his desk to the precisely folded clothing visible through his open wardrobe. It was the desk that drew her attention first. Stacks of correspondence sat in neat piles, each tied with different colored ribbons that suggested some kind of filing system. Evelyn rifled through them carefully, searching for anything that might confirm her suspicions about Magnus's treatment. Most of the letters dealt with routine castle business, supply orders, diplomatic correspondence, reports from various lords throughout the kingdom. But hidden beneath a pile of trade agreements, she found something that made her blood freeze. A letter written in Corwin's distinctive hand, addressed to someone called the Collector. The subject continues to deteriorate as expected. Vision loss remains complete, and neurological symptoms are progressing on schedule. Estimate 6 months remaining before total incapacitation. The new queen presents an unexpected variable. Her presence seems to provide some stabilization. May need to accelerate timeline if interference continues. Evelyn's hands shook as she read the clinical assessment of her husband's condition. Subject, timeline, interference. The cold, calculating language made it clear that Magnus wasn't a patient to Corwin. He was an experiment. But why? What could Corwin possibly gain from slowly murdering the king? The answer came as she continued searching, finding a hidden compartment behind one of the desk drawers. Inside lay a small collection of items that told a horrifying story. Detailed maps of the kingdom with strategic locations marked, correspondence with several minor lords expressing concerns about Magnus's fitness to rule, and most damning of all, a marriage contract between Corwin Darkwater and the surviving royal widow. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Corwin wasn't just killing Magnus. He was planning to marry his widow and rule through her. A perfectly orchestrated coup that would appear completely legitimate to the outside world. And she was the unwitting centerpiece of his scheme. I had hoped you were merely curious rather than dangerously clever. Evelyn spun around to find Corwin standing in the doorway, his traveling clothes dusty, but his expression coldly calm. In the lamplight, his usually handsome features looked predatory, all pretense of charm stripped away. "You're back early," she managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. Fortunately for me, he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Though I suspect not so fortunately for you. I don't know what you mean. But even as she spoke, Evelyn was backing toward the window, her mind racing through possible escape routes. Corwin laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "Please, Your Majesty. We're both intelligent people. You've discovered my little collection, and I've caught you red-handed. Let's not insult each other with denials." He moved to his desk, noting the displaced papers with obvious displeasure. "You've been busy. Tell me what gave me away. I thought I'd been quite careful." "The progression of Magnus's illness," Evelyn said, abandoning any pretense. "Curses don't work that way." "Ah, a student of magical theory. How refreshing." Corwin opened one of the desk drawers, withdrawing a small crystal vial filled with dark liquid. "You're absolutely right, of course. Tears of the Banshee, a much more reliable method than messy assassination attempts. Why?" The question tore from her throat. "Magnus trusts you. He considers you a friend. Magnus is a romantic fool who believes in honor and justice." Corwin's lip curled in disgust. "Do you know what this kingdom could become under proper leadership? What alliances we could forge? What territories we could claim? But no. Our noble king prefers diplomacy to conquest, mercy to strength. So you decided to murder him. I decided to spare the realm from his weakness." Corwin set the vial on the desk with careful precision. The plan was quite elegant, really. A slow decline that would appear natural, followed by a grieving period where his devoted beta would care for the royal widow. Eventually, romance would bloom from shared sorrow, and I would become king through marriage rather than violence. The lords would never accept you as ruler, wouldn't they? By the time Magnus dies, I'll have spent months demonstrating my competence while he grows increasingly incapacitated. His widow, devastated by grief, overwhelmed by royal duties, would naturally turn to her late husband's most trusted advisor for guidance and comfort. His smile was reptilian, the The marriage would seem not just appropriate but necessary for the stability of the realm. Evelyn felt sick as she realized how thoroughly Corwin had planned every detail. But I wasn't supposed to be here. You needed a different queen for your plan. True, your marriage was an unexpected complication. His eyes narrowed. You were supposed to be a brief political alliance. Grateful for the elevation, content to remain in the background while I handled the real business of governance. Instead, you've proven inconveniently perceptive, and inconveniently stabilizing to Magnus's condition. That too. Corwin picked up the vial again, rolling it between his fingers. Your presence seems to counteract some of the poison's effects. Fascinating, really, though ultimately irrelevant. What do you mean? I mean, my dear queen, that your investigation ends tonight. He pulled another item from the drawer. A second vial, this one containing a clear liquid. Accidental poisoning is such a tragic thing. You'll sample some wine intended for your husband, not knowing it contains a concentrated dose meant for his final treatment. Terror clawed at Evelyn's throat. He'll never believe I died accidentally. Won't he? His beloved wife, killed by his own medicine because she was trying to help him during one of his episodes? Corwin's expression was almost pitying. The guilt alone will probably kill him faster than the poison. A counter-proposal. I'm listening. You will say nothing about what you've discovered tonight. You will continue to play the devoted wife while Magnus completes his decline. And in exchange, your family will remain safe. Your brother. Your mother. Everyone you hold dear. And if I refuse? Corwin's smile returned, cold and sharp as a blade. Then tomorrow morning, you'll receive tragic news from Millbrook. Timothy's fever has returned with a vengeance. Your mother has taken ill as well. Such a pity that the royal antidote seems to have lost its potency. The threat hit her like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind. Timothy's pale face burning with fever. Her mother collapsed beside his bed. Both of them suffering while she remained trapped and helpless in the castle. You already have people watching them, she realized. I have people watching everyone who matters to me, Your Majesty. The question is, do you value your husband's life more than your family's? It was an impossible choice, and they both knew it. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the walls of Corwin's trap closing around her. If she exposed him, her family would die. If she remained silent, Magnus would continue his slow descent toward death, and she would eventually become Corwin's unwilling bride. You need more time to consider, Corwin observed with false sympathy. I understand. It's a weighty decision, but don't take too long. Magnus's condition is becoming quite severe. I'd estimate he has perhaps 2 more weeks before the final stages begin. 2 weeks, 14 days to find some way out of this nightmare. Some solution that would save both her husband and her family. I'll keep your secret, she said finally, the words tasting like ash. For now. Wise choice. Corwin returned both vials to the drawer, his manner once again that of the helpful, concerned Beta. I'm sure we'll find a way to work together for the good of the realm. As Evelyn made her way back to her chambers through the dark corridors, she felt like she was drowning. Every option seemed to lead to death and destruction. Every choice demanded an unbearable sacrifice. But as she slipped back into her rooms, one thought burned bright in her mind. Corwin had made a crucial mistake. He'd revealed not just his methods, but his timeline. 2 weeks meant she had time to plan. Time to find some weakness in his seemingly perfect scheme. And perhaps most importantly, he'd confirmed something she'd suspected but hadn't dared hope. Her presence was actually helping Magnus fight the poison's effects, which meant she wasn't helpless after all. She just had to figure out how to use that knowledge before time ran out for everyone she loved. Chapter 5. Under Chantage. The next few days passed in a haze of carefully orchestrated normalcy that felt like walking through a waking nightmare. Evelyn moved through her daily routines, breakfasting with the noble ladies, attending court functions, sharing evening meals with Magnus, all while Corwin's threats hung over her like a blade suspended by the thinnest thread. The worst part was watching Magnus deteriorate before her eyes while being powerless to help him. True to Corwin's prediction, his condition had worsened dramatically since their confrontation. The episodes came more frequently now, leaving him pale and shaking, increasingly dependent on the medicine that was slowly killing him. I'm concerned about His Majesty, Lady Beatrice murmured during one of their afternoon embroidery sessions. The elderly woman had served the royal family for decades and had always been forthright in her observations. He seemed so much frailer than when you first arrived. Evelyn's needle slipped, pricking her finger and sending a droplet of blood onto the white silk she'd been stitching. The healers say his condition naturally fluctuates. Perhaps. But Beatrice's sharp eyes suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Though I must say, Lord Corwin has been most attentive in his care. Such dedication to his king's well-being. The words made Evelyn's stomach churn. If only Lady Beatrice knew the truth about Corwin's dedication. That evening brought fresh torment in the form of a letter from Millbrook. Evelyn's hands trembled as she broke the familiar seal, dreading what news it might contain. To her relief, the message was innocuous. Her mother writing about the changing season, Timothy's recovery progressing well, the usual domestic concerns of country life. But tucked inside the folded parchment was a second, smaller note, written in a different hand. Such a charming family. Young Timothy particularly enjoys his daily walks by the river. Alone. It would be such a pity if he were to slip on the wet stones during one of his adventures. Children can be so careless around water. There was no signature, but Evelyn didn't need one. The message was clear. Corwin's reach extended far beyond the castle walls, and her family remained at his mercy. Bad news from home? Magnus asked, looking up from the correspondence he'd been dictating to his secretary. Not at all, Evelyn managed, crumpling the threatening note in her palm. Timothy continues to improve. Mother sends her regards. Magnus smiled, and the genuine warmth in his expression made her chest ache. I'm glad. Your brother seems to be a remarkable young man, surviving such a severe illness at his age. If only he knew that Timothy's survival might now depend on her silence about another kind of illness entirely. The secretary finished transcribing Magnus's final letter and departed, leaving them alone in the study. It had become their custom to spend these quiet evening hours together. And despite everything, Evelyn found herself treasuring these moments. Away from the prying eyes of the court, Magnus allowed his careful composure to relax, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been under different circumstances. Come here, he said softly, extending his hand toward her. Evelyn approached slowly, still marveling at how he always seemed to know exactly where she was despite his blindness. When she was close enough, he caught her hand and drew her down to sit on the arm of his chair. You've been distant lately, he observed, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. Have I done something to displease you? The question nearly broke her heart. Here was a man slowly dying by poison, worried that he had somehow failed to be a good husband to the woman who was being forced to watch it happen. You could never displease me, she whispered, and was startled to realize how much she meant it. Somewhere in the weeks since their wedding, her feelings had evolved far beyond dutiful obligation. She was genuinely, desperately in love with this complex, honorable man, which made her forced silence even more unbearable. I worry about you, Magnus continued, his other hand rising to cup her cheek. You carry such sadness in your voice lately. If there's anything troubling you, anything at all, I want to help. Evelyn leaned into his touch, fighting back tears. I just hate seeing you suffer. The episodes have been so much worse recently. I know. His expression grew troubled. Corwin says it's the natural progression of the curse, that we should expect the symptoms to intensify before they stabilize. But I confess, there are times when I wonder if I'll lose my mind before my sight returns. Her heart clenched at the hope in his voice, the belief that his vision might eventually be restored. What if it never comes back? Would that change how you feel about us? Never. His response was immediate and fierce. Sight is just one sense among many. I can hear the music in your voice, feel the gentleness in your touch, smell the jasmine you wear in your hair. I can map the geography of your face with my fingertips and know that you're more beautiful than any woman I've ever seen. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, sending heat spiraling through her chest. Besides, I'm beginning to suspect that some things are more clearly seen with the heart than with the eyes. The tenderness in his voice, the way he touched her as if she were something precious and fragile, made her breath catch. Before she could second-guess herself, she leaned down and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was everything she'd dreamed it might be. Soft at first, then deepening as Magnus's hand tangled in her hair. She could taste the wine from dinner on his lips, feel the controlled strength in his arms as he pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Evelyn," he murmured against her temple, her name a prayer on his lips. "I love you," she whispered, the words torn from her very soul. "I know this marriage wasn't supposed to be about love, but I can't help it. I love you so much it terrifies me." Magnus went very still for a moment, and she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then his arms tightened around her, and she felt moisture on his cheeks. "I was afraid to hope," he admitted roughly. "A blind king. More burden than blessing. What could I possibly offer a woman like you? Everything." She cradled his face in her hands, thumbs brushing away his tears. "You offer me everything that matters." They might have stayed there forever, lost in the wonder of finally acknowledging what had been growing between them. But footsteps in the corridor outside broke the spell. Magnus straightened, automatically resuming his royal composure as Corwin appeared in the doorway. "Your Majesty," the beta said with his usual practiced smile, though Evelyn caught the way his gaze lingered on their intimate positioning. "I have your evening medication." "Actually, I'm feeling quite well tonight," Magnus replied, his arm still around Evelyn's waist. "Perhaps we can skip the dose." Something flickered in Corwin's expression. Irritation, quickly masked. "Your Majesty, I must insist. The treatment schedule is quite specific. Missing doses could cause a severe setback in your recovery." "Of course." Magnus's voice carried resignation, but Evelyn could feel the tension in his body. "I wouldn't want to undo all your hard work." As Magnus accepted the familiar dark vial and drank its contents, Evelyn watched Corwin's face carefully. The satisfaction there was subtle but unmistakable, the expression of a man watching his plan unfold exactly as intended. "There," Corwin said cheerfully. "That should help you rest more comfortably tonight. Though I suspect the medication may be stronger than usual, the apothecary mentioned adjusting the formula. Stronger." Evelyn's blood turned to ice as she realized what that meant. Corwin was accelerating his timeline, increasing the poison doses to speed Magnus toward his final decline. "I think I'll retire early then," Magnus said, already showing signs of the lethargy that followed his treatments. "Evelyn, will you help me to our chambers?" "Of course." As they made their slow way up the stairs, Magnus leaning more heavily on her arm than usual, Evelyn's mind raced. Corwin had been clear about his expectations. She was to remain silent while Magnus died, then accept the beta's marriage proposal for the good of the kingdom. But what he hadn't counted on was the depth of her feelings for her husband. She wasn't going to stand by and watch the man she loved waste away, no matter what threats hung over her family. By the time they reached the royal chambers, Magnus was struggling to keep his eyes open. Evelyn helped him to bed, her heart breaking as she watched him fight against the drugged stupor. "Stay with me," he mumbled, catching her hand as she started to withdraw. "Please, these nightmares, they're getting worse." Evelyn settled beside him on the bed, stroking his hair as his breathing gradually evened out. But she didn't sleep. Instead, she lay in the darkness, forming desperate plans. She needed an antidote to the tears of the banshee. She needed proof of Corwin's treachery, and she needed to find some way to protect her family while she worked to save her husband. It seemed impossible. But as she listened to Magnus's labored breathing and felt the fever building in his skin, she knew she had no choice. Love demanded that she try, even if the attempt destroyed them both. The next morning brought another message from Millbrook, this one far more urgent than the previous evening's veiled threats. Timothy had suffered a relapse, not of the moon fever, but of something new and mysterious that had left him bedridden and burning with fever. "The local healer is baffled," her mother wrote. "It came on so suddenly, and nothing seems to help. I fear we may lose him after all." Evelyn read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking with rage and terror. Corwin had made good on his threat, striking at her family to ensure her continued compliance. More bad news? Corwin himself appeared at her elbow, his tone solicitous but his eyes cold with calculation. "Timothy has taken ill again," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "How terrible. I do hope it's nothing serious." But his expression suggested he knew exactly how serious it was. "Perhaps you should consider visiting him, if His Majesty can spare you." The offer hung between them like poisoned honey. They both knew she couldn't leave. Not with Magnus deteriorating so rapidly. And that was exactly what Corwin had planned. "I think I'll stay," she said carefully. "My husband needs me here." "How devoted of you." His smile was sharp as a blade. "Though I do worry about young Timothy. Children can decline so quickly from mysterious ailments." The threat was clear. Comply completely, or watch her brother die slowly and painfully while she remained trapped and helpless. But as Evelyn watched Corwin walk away, confident in his control over the situation, she made a silent vow. He had underestimated her once again, assumed that threats to her family would render her completely powerless. He was about to learn how wrong he was. That night, as Magnus slept deeply under the influence of his increased medication, Evelyn began to put her desperate plan into motion. She had perhaps a week before the poison reached its final fatal stages. It would have to be enough. Chapter 6. Battle of the Wolves. The antidote had taken Evelyn 3 precious days to prepare. Stolen hours in the castle's abandoned alchemical laboratory, while Magnus slept under increasingly heavy sedation. The ancient text she'd found described a complex mixture of silver leaf, moonwort, and purified spring water that could neutralize the tears of the banshee, but only if administered before the poison reached its final stages. She prayed she wasn't too late. Magnus had grown frighteningly weak in recent days. The tremors were constant now, and he rarely stayed conscious for more than a few hours at a time. When he did wake, his words were often confused, rambling speeches about enemies in the shadows and plots against the crown that Corwin dismissed as fevered delusions. If only he knew how close to the truth those delusions really were. "His Majesty is asking for you," Corwin announced, appearing in the doorway of the solar where Evelyn had been pretending to embroider. "Though I'm afraid he's quite disoriented. The curse seems to be affecting his mind now as well as his body." Evelyn set down her needlework with hands that trembled only slightly. "I'll go to him immediately. I should warn you," Corwin continued, falling into step beside her as they made their way toward the royal chambers. "His condition may be disturbing. Perhaps it would be better if you waited until he's more lucid. My place is at my husband's side," she replied firmly. Disturbing or not, she caught the flash of irritation in Corwin's expression before he smoothed it away. "Of course, Your Majesty. How devoted you are." They found Magnus in bed, his skin gray and clammy with fever sweat. His dark hair clung to his forehead, and his breathing was shallow and labored. But his eyes, those pale blue-gray eyes that had captured her heart, tracked toward her voice when she spoke. "I'm here," she said softly, taking his hand in hers. "I'm right here. Evelyn?" His voice was barely a whisper. "They're coming for us. In the shadows. They're planning—" "Shh." She smoothed his hair back from his face, noting how his skin burned with unnatural heat. "You're safe. I'm here with you. The wine," he mumbled, his grip on her hand surprisingly strong. "Don't drink the wine. Promise me. Promise you won't." Evelyn's blood chilled. Even in his fevered state, Magnus was trying to warn her about something. Did he suspect? Had some part of him realized what was being done to him? "I promise," she whispered. "I won't drink anything I shouldn't." "Good." His eyes drifted closed. "So tired, but I can't sleep. The dreams, they show me such terrible things." Corwin stepped forward with his familiar vial of dark liquid. "His Majesty needs his medication. It will help him rest." "No." The word came out sharper than Evelyn intended. "Let him sleep naturally. He seems calmer now." "I'm afraid that's not possible. His condition requires precise timing for the treatments." Corwin's tone was pleasant but implacable. "We can't risk allowing the symptoms to spike again." Magnus stirred at the sound of their voices, his hand tightening on Evelyn's. "Don't let them," he whispered. "The poison. In everything." Corwin's expression hardened. "You see? The fever makes him paranoid, delusional. He needs the medicine to clear his mind." But Evelyn was studying her husband's face, seeing past the obvious signs of illness to something deeper. His words weren't random. They were warnings. Somehow, despite the drugs clouding his thoughts, Magnus knew, perhaps not the full extent of Corwin's betrayal, but enough to understand that he was being slowly murdered. "I won't let anyone hurt you," she said, loud enough for both men to hear. "I swear it." Magnus's eyes opened, focusing on her with startling intensity. My brave queen, he breathed. My heart. My mate. The word hit her like lightning. Mate. In the world of shifters, the term carried profound meaning, a bond deeper than marriage, a recognition of souls destined for each other. And somehow, despite his human upbringing, Magnus had found the right word for what they'd become. Yes, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Your mate, and I will protect you. How touching, Corwin said dryly. But sentiment won't cure His Majesty's condition. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to administer his treatment. He approached the bed with the poisoned vial, and Evelyn knew she was out of time. The antidote hidden in her dress pocket wouldn't work if Magnus received another massive dose of toxin. She had to act now, regardless of the consequences. Don't come any closer, she said, rising to stand between Corwin and the bed. Your Majesty, you're overwrought. Perhaps you should... I know what you've been doing. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I know about the tears of the Banshee. I know about your plans to marry me after Magnus dies. I know everything. Corwin went very still, his pleasant mask finally slipping completely. I see. And what exactly do you plan to do with this knowledge? Expose you. Heal him. Make sure you never hurt anyone again. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Corwin set the vial on the bedside table and turned to face her fully. You see, I've already sent word to my associates in Millbrook. Poor young Timothy's condition has taken a severe turn for the worse. Without immediate intervention, he'll be dead within the hour. Evelyn's heart stopped. You're lying. Am I? Would you like to risk your brother's life on that assumption? His smile was cold as winter frost. Or perhaps your mother's. She was so distraught over Timothy's relapse that she collapsed. Such a weak heart. These older women sometimes have. Stop. The word tore from her throat. Please. They're innocent. Then stop interfering with my work. He picked up the vial again, moving toward Magnus. Accept that your husband is dying, and focus on preparing yourself for widowhood. But as Corwin reached for Magnus, something extraordinary happened. Despite his weakened state, despite the poison coursing through his system, the Alpha King began to shift. Evelyn had heard that Magnus was a powerful shapeshifter before his blindness, but she'd never seen him transform. Now she watched in awe as his human form blurred and reformed, bones reshaping, muscles expanding, until a massive black wolf lay on the bed where the man had been. Even poisoned and fevered, Magnus in his wolf form was magnificent. His coat was midnight black except for silver markings around his eyes, and despite his blindness, his head turned unerringly toward Corwin's scent. Impossible, Corwin breathed. The poison should have made shifting impossible, but Evelyn understood. Love had given Magnus the strength to transform. Desperation had given him the will, and the wolf knew, with instincts deeper than human reason, that his mate was in danger. You want to fight a wolf, Evelyn said, her own body beginning to tingle with the familiar sensation of approaching change. Then face two of them. Her own shift was less dramatic than Magnus's, but no less powerful. Her wolf form was smaller, sleeker, with a coat of rich chestnut brown that matched her human hair. But she was quick and fierce, and she had been preparing for this moment her entire life without knowing it. Corwin's eyes widened in shock as he found himself facing two wolves instead of a sick man and a helpless woman. This is impossible. You're supposed to be weak Omegas, not... He never finished the sentence. Magnus lunged first, his powerful jaws snapping at Corwin's throat. The beta stumbled backward, his own shift beginning as survival instincts kicked in. Corwin's wolf form was gray and lean, built for cunning rather than brute strength. Under normal circumstances, he might have been a formidable opponent. But these weren't normal circumstances. He was facing an Alpha King fighting for his mate's life and his own survival, guided by an Omega female who had been using their mental bond to serve as his eyes. The battle was fierce, but brief. Corwin was skilled, but he was also alone, and the poison that should have weakened Magnus seemed to have no effect on his wolf form. Working together, Magnus and Evelyn cornered the treacherous beta against the chamber wall. When Magnus's jaws closed around Corwin's throat, the gray wolf went limp with a gurgling whine. It was over. As they shifted back to human form, Magnus collapsed immediately. the effort of transformation and combat draining what little strength he had left. Evelyn caught him as he fell, cradling his head in her lap as his breathing grew more labored. "The antidote," she whispered, fumbling in her dress pocket for the vial she'd prepared. "Magnus, you need to drink this. Please." His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with immense effort. "What is it?" "Your salvation." She held the vial to his lips. "Trust me." Magnus drank the bitter liquid without question, his faith in her absolute despite everything. Then his eyes closed again, and his breathing steadied for the first time in weeks. Evelyn held him close, watching his face for signs of improvement. The antidote would take time to work, but she could already see some of the gray pallor leaving his skin. "Is he?" a voice asked from the doorway. Evelyn looked up to find Master Aldrich standing there, his face pale with shock as he took in the scene. Corwin's lifeless body, Magnus unconscious but breathing steadily, and the Queen cradling her husband with tears streaming down her face. "He'll live," she said with fierce certainty. "We both will." And the beta got what he deserved. Evelyn's voice was hard as steel. He was poisoning the king, slowly murdering him with tears of the banshee while planning to take the throne through marriage. Aldrich's expression shifted from shock to grim understanding. "I suspected something was amiss, but I never imagined, dear gods, your majesty. I should have spoken sooner. It's over now." She looked down at Magnus, whose breathing was growing stronger by the minute. "And we're going to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." As the dawnlight crept through the chamber windows, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The immediate threat was ended, the truth was revealed, and her mate was beginning to heal. But she knew their trials weren't over yet. Magnus would need time to recover fully, and there would be questions about Corwin's death and the conspiracy he'd orchestrated. Most importantly, she needed to send word to Millbrook immediately to ensure her family's safety and expose whatever network of associates Corwin had been working with. For now, though, she was content to hold her husband close and feel his heartbeat growing stronger beneath her touch. They had faced the darkness together and emerged victorious. And soon, if the moon goddess willed it, Magnus might even be able to see her face when he told her he loved her. Chapter 7. Renewal and Recovery. 3 days after the confrontation with Corwin, Magnus opened his eyes to shadows and light, the first time in 3 years that his world wasn't shrouded in complete darkness. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I can see shapes, movement." She was beside him instantly, her heart racing with hope and disbelief. "What do you see?" "Light streaming through the window. The outline of the bed hangings." His hand found her face with trembling fingers. "And something bright and warm that must be you." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she leaned into his touch. Master Aldrich had warned her that the antidote might restore some of Magnus's vision, but she hadn't dared hope for so much improvement so quickly. The poison's effects were truly reversing. Over the next week, Magnus's recovery progressed with remarkable speed. Each day brought clearer sight, stronger limbs, and more lucid thoughts. The tremors that had plagued him for months disappeared entirely, and his natural alpha strength began to reassert itself. But it was the emotional healing that touched Evelyn's heart most deeply. "Tell me about the battle," Magnus said one evening as they sat together in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. His vision was still somewhat blurred, but he could make out colors and shapes now, enough to appreciate the beauty he'd been denied for so long. "We fought together," Evelyn said simply, "as mates should. I remember feeling your presence in my mind during the shift. Your wolf was guiding mine, helping me navigate without sight." He turned toward her, his blue-gray eyes focusing with increasing accuracy. "How is such a bond possible?" "I don't know." She took his hand, marveling at how steady his fingers were now. "But from the moment I first saw you, something inside me recognized you. Even when I thought this marriage was purely political, my heart knew better." Magnus raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "My brave, brilliant queen. You saved my life in more ways than one." The investigation into Corwin's conspiracy had revealed the full scope of his treachery. Hidden documents in his chambers detailed correspondence with several ambitious nobles who had been prepared to support his claim to the throne through marriage. More disturbing still were the records of other accidents, that had befallen potential rivals over the years. Magnus wasn't Corwin's first victim, merely his most important one. The council has voted to strip House Darkwater of all titles and holdings, Magnus reported during one of their morning walks. Corwin's younger brother has agreed to testify against the remaining conspirators in exchange for exile rather than execution. And my family? Timothy has made a full recovery. It seems Corwin's associates fled the moment word reached them of his death. Your mother sends her love and asks when she might visit her new son-in-law properly. Evelyn smiled, imagining her mother's reaction to learning that her daughter had not only married for love, but had fought wolves to save her husband. Catherine Renworth would be insufferably proud. But it was the personal revelations that mattered most to both of them. I need to tell you something, Magnus said one afternoon as they stood on the battlements overlooking the kingdom. His vision had improved enough that he could make out the distant mountains, though details were still fuzzy. About why I could shift during the battle, despite the poison. You found the strength because I was in danger. More than that. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. I've been able to sense you since our wedding night. Your emotions, your location, even your dreams sometimes. I thought it was wishful thinking, the desperate imaginings of a dying man. But when Corwin threatened you, when I felt your fear through our bond, something awakened in me that was stronger than any poison. Evelyn's breath caught. You're saying we have a true mate bond? I'm saying that fate brought us together for reasons that go far beyond political necessity. Magnus cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. You are the other half of my soul, Evelyn. My heart, my anchor, my salvation. And you are mine, she whispered, rising on her toes to meet his kiss. This time, when their lips met, there was no hesitation, no careful restraint. Magnus kissed her with the fervor of a man who had nearly lost everything and found it again. And Evelyn responded with equal passion, pouring all her love and relief into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Magnus rested his forehead against hers. Marry me again, he said softly. What? Our first wedding was a political arrangement. This time I want to marry you for love, before the moon goddess and all our people. I want everyone to know that you chose me, as I choose you, with our whole hearts. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Yes, absolutely yes. The ceremony took place 3 weeks later, under the full moon in the castle's great courtyard. Unlike their first wedding, this celebration was joyous, filled with genuine well-wishers who had come to love their brave queen and witness their king's remarkable recovery. Timothy had arrived from Millbrook the day before, his 8-year-old face bright with excitement as he was fitted for his role as ring-bearer. Lady Catherine wept happy tears as she helped Evelyn prepare, marveling at how love had transformed her daughter from a frightened girl into a radiant woman. You look like a queen, Catherine said, as she adjusted Evelyn's new silk gown, this one chosen for beauty, rather than political expediency. I feel like one, Evelyn replied, and meant it. The scared young woman who had agreed to marry a stranger to save her brother seemed like a different person entirely. The ceremony itself was everything their first wedding had not been. Intimate despite the crowd, joyful despite the solemn vows, and absolutely genuine in every word spoken. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, in the bonds of true love, Magnus lifted Evelyn's veil with hands that trembled not with poison, but with emotion. Hello, my beautiful wife, he said softly, his vision now clear enough to see her face in perfect detail for the first time. Hello, my beloved husband, she replied, and kissed him as the crowd erupted in cheers. The celebration continued long into the night, but eventually, Magnus and Evelyn slipped away from the festivities to walk alone in the moonlit gardens. The same path where they had first begun to fall in love now served as witness to their complete devotion. Do you regret any of it? Magnus asked, as they paused beside the fountain where he had first touched her face. The arranged marriage, the danger, the uncertainty? Never. Evelyn's response was immediate and fierce. Every moment of pain led us to this happiness. Every trial made us stronger together. Even if you could go back and choose differently? She considered the question seriously, thinking of all the paths her life might have taken. She could have refused the marriage, let Timothy die, remained safe in her small village existence. She could have accepted Corwin's threats, stayed silent, watched Magnus die rather than risk her family, but none of those choices would have led her here, to this moment, to this man who saw her as his equal and his salvation. I would make the same choice every time, she said finally, because it led me to you. Magnus pulled her close, holding her against his chest, where she could hear his strong, steady heartbeat, so different from the irregular rhythm she had feared losing forever. My heart belongs to you, he murmured against her hair. For this life, and whatever comes after, and mine to you, she replied. Always and forever. Above them, the full moon shone down with silver light, blessing their union and illuminating the future that stretched ahead. Uncertain in its details, but absolutely secure in its foundation of love, trust, and unshakable devotion. They had been forged in fire and emerged as pure gold, stronger for their trials, and ready for whatever challenges might come. Together, they would rule with wisdom and compassion, building a kingdom worthy of the love that had saved them both. And in a few months' time, when Evelyn discovered she was carrying the heir they had both hoped for, their joy would be complete. But for now, it was enough to stand in the moonlight, holding each other close, and know that they had found their happily ever after despite all odds. The abandoned bride had become a beloved queen. The blind king had recovered his sight and his strength, and love had conquered every obstacle placed in their path. Chapter 8. The Legacy. 5 years had transformed the kingdom of Valdrek in ways that still amazed those who remembered the dark days of Corwin's conspiracy. Where once fear and suspicion had ruled the corridors of power, now laughter echoed through the castle halls, and genuine warmth characterized the relationships between the royal family and their subjects. Queen Evelyn stood on the highest balcony of the castle, watching her 4-year-old twins race through the gardens below, under the watchful eye of their Uncle Timothy, now 13, and serving as a page in the royal guard. Prince Alexander, with his father's midnight black hair and his mother's warm brown eyes, was currently winning the impromptu race, while Princess Isabella, whose chestnut curls gleamed with golden highlights in the afternoon sun, and whose blue-gray eyes mirrored Magnus's perfectly, was gaining ground with determined concentration. They're getting faster every day, Magnus observed, joining his wife at the balcony railing. At 37, he had grown even more handsome with age, his recovered sight having restored the confident bearing that made him such a formidable king. The silver that now touched his temples only added to his distinguished appearance, and the laugh lines around his eyes spoke of years filled with genuine happiness. Isabella nearly shifted during yesterday's lesson, Evelyn replied, accepting his embrace as he wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. Master Aldrich says it's remarkably early for such young shifters to show signs of transformation. They have powerful bloodlines on both sides, and they're being raised in an environment of love and acceptance, rather than fear and suppression. Magnus pressed a kiss to her temple. They'll be stronger for it. Indeed, the changes in the kingdom extended far beyond the royal family. Magnus's recovery and the exposure of Corwin's treachery had ushered in an era of reform that had strengthened the realm immeasurably. The rigid hierarchies that had once kept the nobility suspicious of each other had been replaced with a more collaborative approach to governance, one that valued competence and integrity over bloodline politics. Your Majesty, a voice interrupted their quiet moment. The afternoon council session is prepared to convene. Evelyn turned to see Sir Marcus, the new head of the Royal Guard, a young knight who had distinguished himself during the purge of Corwin's remaining allies. Unlike his predecessor, Sir Marcus served out of genuine loyalty rather than self-interest, and his reports were always honest rather than calculated. Thank you, Marcus. We'll be down shortly. Magnus's easy familiarity with the guard spoke to another of the changes in the castle's atmosphere. While respect for the crown remained absolute, the paranoid distance that had characterized Corwin's influence had been replaced by genuine camaraderie. As they made their way to the council chamber, Evelyn reflected on how much their relationship had evolved. The political marriage that had begun as a desperate bargain had blossomed into a partnership that strengthened both of them. Magnus valued her insights on domestic policy, while she had learned to navigate the complex web of international diplomacy under his patient guidance. The council session that afternoon dealt with the usual mixture of administrative matters and strategic planning. Trade negotiations with the southern kingdoms were proceeding favorably. The harvest reports indicated another year of prosperity, and the military reforms instituted after Corwin's downfall had resulted in a more loyal and effective fighting force. The Millbrook Academy proposal? Magnus inquired, referring to Evelyn's latest initiative. Construction begins next month, she reported with satisfaction. Timothy has volunteered to help oversee the project during his summer break from his studies. He wants to ensure the library is properly equipped. The academy was one of Evelyn's proudest achievements, a school designed to educate young shifters regardless of their social status, focusing on both traditional learning and the proper development of their supernatural abilities. It would be staffed by reformed healers and scholars who had been recruited from across the kingdom, creating opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than birth. Lady Catherine's health? Inquired Lord Pemberton, the elderly treasurer who had served the crown faithfully for decades and had become one of their most trusted advisors. Much improved, thank you for asking. Evelyn smiled warmly. At 54, her mother had adapted to royal life with surprising grace, serving as an unofficial ambassador to the merchant classes and helping bridge the gap between the nobility and common folk. She's actually been corresponding with several other kingdoms about establishing similar academies. Apparently, our educational reforms are gaining attention abroad. After the council session concluded, Magnus and Evelyn returned to their private chambers to prepare for the evening's entertainment, a celebration of the 5th anniversary of Magnus's recovery. What had begun as a quiet family observance had evolved into an annual festival that brought together people from across the kingdom to celebrate not just the king's health, but the prosperity and peace that had followed. Do you think they understand how close we came to losing everything? Evelyn asked as she fastened the sapphire necklace that had been Magnus's latest gift to her. Some do. Others are too young to remember the fear. Magnus adjusted his formal doublet, the deep blue fabric bringing out his eyes perfectly. But perhaps that's for the best. Let them grow up believing that kingdoms are supposed to be places of justice and opportunity. And love, she asked, moving to stand before him. Especially love. He cupped her face gently, the gesture now as familiar as breathing, but no less meaningful than it had been 5 years ago. Speaking of which, Magnus, I have a confession to make. His expression grew serious, though his eyes sparkled with mischief. I've been keeping a secret from you. Evelyn's heart skipped, though she knew from their bond that nothing was seriously wrong. What kind of secret? The kind that involves Master Aldrich. Several discreet inquiries to neighboring kingdoms, and a great deal of planning. Magnus's smile widened. It seems that certain ancient treaties regarding royal bloodlines have some interesting provisions that I've recently had cause to investigate. Magnus, you're being deliberately mysterious. The Kingdom of Eldermarch has a tradition, he continued, clearly enjoying her confusion. When a royal couple has ruled successfully for 5 years, demonstrating both personal happiness and good governance, they are invited to renew their wedding vows before a gathering of allied kings and queens. Evelyn's eyes widened. You want us to have a 3rd wedding ceremony? I want the entire world to know that the woman who saved my life, who rules beside me as an equal, who gave me the most beautiful children any man could hope for, is mine by choice rather than chance. His voice grew tender. And I want to promise, before witnesses from across the known world, that I will love you for whatever time we have remaining. Be it 5 more years or 50. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks as she launched herself into his arms. Yes, absolutely yes. Again and always yes. The celebration that evening was magnificent. The great hall was filled with nobles and commoners alike, all united in their affection for the royal couple who had brought such positive change to their lives. Alexander and Isabella, dressed in miniature versions of court attire, charmed everyone they met with their bright personalities and obvious intelligence. Timothy, now tall and lean like his father had been, served as one of Magnus's attendants for the ceremony, his pride in his sister evident in every gesture. Lady Catherine, radiant in rose silk, wept happy tears as she watched her daughter renew vows with the man who had transformed from stranger to beloved son-in-law. But it was the moment when Magnus and Evelyn spoke their personally written vows that truly captured everyone's attention. 5 years ago, Magnus began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed hall. I was a broken man who believed he had nothing left to offer the world. You showed me that love is not about what we can give, but about what we choose to share. You saved my life, my sight, my soul, and in return, I promise to spend every day of our remaining years proving myself worthy of the gift you have given me." Evelyn's response was equally heartfelt. "You were never broken, my beloved king. You were simply waiting for someone who could see your true strength. In saving you, I saved myself, because a life without you would be no life at all. I promise to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, in triumph and trial, until the stars themselves burn out." When they kissed to seal their renewed vows, the entire hall erupted in cheers that could be heard throughout the castle and beyond. Later that night, as the celebration wound down and their guests gradually departed, Magnus and Evelyn found themselves once again on the garden balcony, where they had shared so many meaningful conversations. "No regrets?" Magnus asked, echoing the question he had posed 5 years earlier. "Only one," Evelyn replied, surprising him. "Oh? I regret that we can't go back and tell our younger selves how beautiful our future would become. I think it might have spared us both some worry." Magnus laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cool night air. "Though perhaps the uncertainty made us appreciate this happiness more fully. Perhaps." She leaned against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become the rhythm of her own life. "What do you think our children will remember about tonight? That their parents love each other completely, that love can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, that they are cherished beyond measure." Magnus tightened his arms around her. "And that they carry within them the power to create their own extraordinary stories." Below them, the garden sparkled with lanterns and the lingering magic of celebration. Alexander and Isabella had long since been tucked into their beds, exhausted from the excitement, but glowing with happiness at being part of something so special. Timothy had retired to his chambers with a stack of books about military strategy, determined to prove himself worthy of the trust Magnus had placed in him. And throughout the kingdom, people were settling into sleep with the contentment that came from knowing they were ruled by leaders who genuinely cared for their welfare and happiness. "I love you," Evelyn whispered into the peaceful night. "And I love you," Magnus replied, his voice heavy with the absolute certainty that had carried them through every trial, for this life, and all the lives to come. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, each lost in grateful contemplation of the journey that had brought them to this perfect moment. The scared young woman who had agreed to marry a stranger, and the bitter, broken king who had believed himself beyond redemption, had found in each other not just love, but the courage to become the best versions of themselves. Their story had begun with a desperate bargain and blossomed into a legacy of love, justice, and hope that would endure long after they were gone. The twins would grow up strong and wise. Timothy would become a knight worthy of songs, and the kingdom would prosper under the foundation they had built together. But for now, it was enough to stand in the moonlight, holding each other close, and know that they had found their happily ever after despite all odds. The sacrifice had become salvation, the arrangement had become adoration, and love had indeed conquered all.